Hey everyone, welcome to another G News update. Today I'd like to talk a little bit about the desperate rhetoric on the right wing embedded in our media in New Zealand that is seeking to prop up the current government and bring down the future government, Labour, Te Pāti Māori and the Greens, and how it looks like right-wing commentators inside our media are banding together, working together on common themes in order to try and prop up this government that supports the super rich and attacks the working classes and makes things more difficult for everybody. So first of all, I'd like to just start off with, hasn't it been great just to have a little bit more information from Jacinda? Dame Jacinda Ardern, as you know, is releasing her book anytime soon, and the documentary about her is in the International Film Festival, so people will be very keen to see that. I think people in New Zealand who do value expertise and hard work and empathy and all of the kindness and everything that went with a much better New Zealand. I think they value everything that Jacinda has to say. And recently we talked about her great speech at Yale that got a standing ovation from everybody when she talked about how it's not just about you, a very selfish, right-wing, individualized way of looking at life, just me. It's actually all about us and how the world is interconnected, and that speech went down extremely well because it talked about being human, and I think the book and the film are going to be very, very well received in New Zealand. I'd also like to just personally add that Jacinda's looking very well. It's been great for her to get away from politics and good for her health. And that's always great to see. And I think everyone here misses her quite a lot. We had a really great world-class leader there in Jacinda Ardern. She featured in Time magazine a couple of times, something Christopher Luxon wouldn't come anywhere near. Maybe he'd been a mad comic or something. But we did have a world-class leader there, and unfortunately, the people that are in our media really were very, very negative and very one-sided and attacked the kind of things that our society and communities really needed in defense of wealth protection for the very, very wealthy and their own revenues in these commercial media stations. So let's just start today by looking at a couple of pictures. Here's Jacinda with Winston Peters, just so we remember that Winston Peters does flip-flop. He did help Jacinda Ardern come to power. He believed in everything that was more humane about a Labour-led government in 2017. He fully backed Labour all the way for those 3 years between 2017 to 2020. But unfortunately for Winston, he just simply wasn't good enough as a politician to actually get 2 terms. He wasn't some kind of political master that could read the room. And because he lost, he became quite a loser and ended up going over to the dark side and becoming a bit of a Trumpster. And now he's backing the fortunes of Trump and Trump's world in Canada and Trump's world in Australia. And he thinks he can see the future. And political commentators are trying to get behind Winston as much as possible right now to sort of say he's strong, that Hipkins is weak, and Winston has beaten Hipkins to the punch, and really Hipkins needs Winston, and all these kind of fabulously crazy ideas that are pumped out of places like NZME, NZ Herald, the Herald Now, with the former man bun Ryan Bridge, and we'll just come to that. However, let's just quickly have a look at the Post. And this morning, Tracy Watkins has been very, very worried about Jacinda, and she's kind of lashed out in a way in much of her writing today. So one of the first things that Watkins did was describe some of the flagship policies of Jacinda Ardern as abject failures. The Ardern government ended office with an unenviable record. Flagship policies like Kiwi Build and lifting children out of poverty were abject failures. One of those was Kiwi Build, and another one was regarding child poverty and lifting people out of poverty. As you know, Jacinda Ardern did improve 7 out of 9 measures for material hardship, other factors that were affecting children before and after housing costs were removed. And she raised benefits, she brought about the winter energy payment, she brought about different other policies that really helped people that were struggling. And she also instituted all of these measures to measure child poverty that previously the National Party, which were really, I think, Tracy Watkins' favourite party, she was a big fan of John Key for a long time, really refused to deliver. They didn't want to measure child poverty at all before Jacinda Ardern. So I think, what you see here is Tracy Watkins batting for National. The Post is basically a national shop, and she doesn't have any similar criticism right now for the budget that we've just seen and how abjectly poor it was. Yesterday or the day before, Tom Peters came out and wrote about it, and here's what Tom Peters had to say. Worsening Poverty and Social Misery in New Zealand by Tom Peters. Last week, New Zealand's Treasury released a child poverty report which forecast that the proportion of children living in poverty will increase from 17.7% in 2024 to 18.4% in 2029. The report was released along with the National Party-led government's austerity budget, which starves public services while cutting workers' wages, reducing government contributions to retirement savings, and barring thousands of unemployed teenagers from welfare. The government is seeking to solve the worsening economic crisis by ramping up the exploitation of the working class while protecting the fortunes of the super rich. So, as I said, Tracy Watkins didn't have any criticism for any of that, and is really had a claws out for Jacinda Ardern, really trying to keep the negativity going as much as possible. And you can see also that Tracy Watkins believes that lockdowns were the big problem when it came to the COVID pandemic and how it was all managed. She believed that there shouldn't have been any lockdowns, especially I think before we had a vaccine. I think that would have been catastrophic for all of us, but lockdowns apparently were bad, and we didn't see anything too sophisticated from Watkins about this, other than the fact that lockdowns apparently continued on long after they served their purpose. But really, when were the last lockdowns? The last lockdowns ended up being towards the end of 2021. There was one in Auckland that went on maybe a few weeks longer than it should, but it wasn't the way that Watkins put it. Here's how Watkins said, as someone who worked in the press gallery during that time, I turned the pages looking for answers to some of my questions from that period. I would have loved a forensic blow-by-blow, for instance, for some understanding of how we got to where we were by the end, a country divided by lockdowns that carried on long after they had lost their sense of purpose. So really, clearly Watkins is not correct about the lockdowns, but you can see that she's been talking to Luke Malpass. Here's what Malpass says about lockdowns, that it was lockdowns that were the big problem. And quite aside from whether Labour is doing well or not in opposition, the big question is really one of time. In Auckland in particular, the party continues to be on the nose. Even if the left of centre party ends up humming in opposition and government's polling were to start slipping or missteps were to mount up, it is an open question whether enough time has passed since the long series of lockdowns in Auckland to become a little less raw. When I talk to people about COVID, the kind of things that I hear that pissed people off had a little bit to do with whether you couldn't get back into the country for a couple of months because you were delayed, particularly before we actually had vaccines at a safe level for the world of Maori people and the world of Pacifica people who are still catching up on vaccination rates in various parts of New Zealand. So the selfish desire to actually travel freely in a world where there's deadly diseases and we haven't quite finished vaccinating really pissed a lot of people off. They want to come back and cause mass infections if they could. To hell with you and your health, to hell with your family. I want to come back to New Zealand today. So there was that resentment. There was also a very difficult area where if someone had died for a period of time, it was pretty stringent about who could attend funerals. And I think those were the major grievances, not really the lockdowns and how long lockdowns took. Lockdowns caused some economic pain for people, for sure. But really, when you look at the overall period and how that pandemic was managed, what Watkins is not telling New Zealanders today is that we lived in relative freedom for a long period. We had 6 months at one point where we were basically operating as normal, even though we were in a kind of a cocoon. You know, the borders were closed. We went about our business because there was no COVID here. Now, that was a far better and more free environment that doesn't get any credence or credit or anything like that from Tracy Watkins at the Post in her recent assessment. She was, in fact, giving away the fact that she blamed Jacinda. She thought that the whole COVID thing was poorly managed, that it was a terrible thing, and she was looking for regret. She was looking for signs that evil deeds had been done by Jacinda Ardern. It was very bad. And here's the evidence. Just look here. The book deals with these moments, but if, like me, you're looking for fresh insights or signs of regret over some of the decisions her government made, you may be disappointed. So as you can see, Watkins was looking for regret and something, like an admission of failure, which I think is a terrible thing for an editor of a newspaper to be kind of disclosing that they were looking for regret. Really, we actually had a world-class COVID response, and we had a pretty good economic response. And it's not until austerity and all these other measures, these neoliberal ways of thinking have been applied, that we've seen massive job cuts, that we've seen cuts to the public service that were not necessary, that we've seen a rise in meth levels in the water, that crime is up, that people can walk away with $499 worth of shoplifting because the police just aren't resourced. We can't get these 500 police by November. Now, none of that mattered to Watkins. She wasn't actually criticising this government. They're kind of like the favoured ones, the ones that can do no wrong. So Ryan Bridge was actually making out that Winston Peters was a absolute political genius who always reads the room properly. Here's the headline from Brian Ridge this morning. Political wizard Winston Peters casts spell around Chris Hipkins by Ryan Bridge. Bridge was saying that Winston had actually signalled that he wouldn't work with Labour in a recent conference when he called Labour a bunch of people that didn't learn and were still losers. But he goes on to say the following: but this was crystal clear, and it is interesting for a couple of reasons. Winston is a political wizard, and he knows how to read the room and play the game. This is not a random outburst. This is a calculated decision based on the path he thinks will get New Zealand First back to the Treasury benches. So yeah, if it is true that Winston Peters is a political master who can see everything as Ryan Bridge portrays him to be, then that contradicts exactly what Luke Malpass was saying this morning in the Post. Malpass instead says, well, maybe it would be good if Winston Peters could actually win a second term. Now freed up from the responsibilities of being deputy, Peters will be able to put some more distance between New Zealand First and the other governing parties over the next 17 odd months until the general election. But this time the run-in to the election looks likely to be from a position of stability and relative strength. Can he finally get 2 terms in a row? Because he tends to get 1 term and then he doesn't read the room and he doesn't get it right. So in actual fact, what we're seeing now by him not backing Labour right now is the same old pattern of Winston reading the room wrongly. I mean, he's kind of like flipping a dice. 50% of the time he's right, but 50% of the time he's not. Ryan Bridge also gives away that he's actually quite snotty and upset and offended by the way that Chris Hipkins tells the truth in Parliament, and he refers to this truth-telling as riding a high horse around. This year alone, he has labelled the New Zealand First leader a pale version of Donald Trump, a conspiracy theorist and spokesman for the tobacco lobby. Hipkins' failure to rule out working with him undermines the high horse he canters around Parliament. His protestations sound a bit hollow. I asked Hipkins last week whether he would give Winnie the flick, especially seeing there was now zero chance of them working together anyway, but he wouldn't. The reason is simple: MMP maths. Ryan Bridge also claims that the high horse and the whole thing with Hipkins not ruling out Winston Peters was to do with MMP math, that he concluded that there was this possible coalition of clowns he calls Labour, Greens and Te Pāti Māori clowns. Another thing that made me laugh this morning about Ryan Bridge was the idea that he could see the future with some certainty, and he was very clear, even though no one else can tell, that the economic winds will be at Christopher Luxon's back in 2026. Everything will be fine again by then. On current polling, Labour would need both the Greens and Te Pāti Māori at the cabinet table to form a government, and I think Hipkins knows deep down this is not a winning combination in the mind of undecided voters, especially not in 2026, when the economic winds are expected to be at Luxon's back. So apparently he knows things that nobody else knows about what Trump will do. Apparently Ryan Bridge has a handle on all that. Or he's just talking shit to everybody and they're all being misled by Ryan Bridge at NZME, which I think is probably more likely the case. He's got no right to talk like that or write like that, and he's basically wrong. But again, it's about these panic stations. They can see the fact that this government's going down the gurgler. Added to the mix is a Green Party, which has taken a far more left-wing and even Trotskyite hue. Te Pāti Māori, which is mostly chasing Māori seats, with a showy separatist agenda, and a Labour Party which appears to have recovered from its disastrous result in 2023, but is currently far from a dominant force ready to come back to government. Here we are again with these people in the media like Malpass and Coughlin branding the Greens as Trotskyite. Now Trotsky, he was murdered by Stalin in Stalin's agents who came and hit him with an ice pick, I think, in about, was it 1940 or so in Mexico City. So obviously the Greens are Trotskyites, you know, and Stalin and Russia are probably after the Greens here, if Thomas Coughlin and Luke Malpass are being accurate here. But I think really what's going on is that the defence of the wealth is under threat here. You know, we've got a situation where we've got a very strong opposition coming through. We've got a very, very bad budget, terrible conditions that are going far worse than anyone thought. And when it comes to the economy, there's no growth. And so we've got these people in the media who are now desperately trying to attack Chris Hipkins, desperately trying to suggest that all the Green Party are communists and Marxists and Trotskyites, and that Te Pāti Māori are a bunch of separatists. So you can see that this is all about fear, and they're pumping the fear out of NZME. This is Stephen Joyce is going to be the chairman of this fear-based organisation that doesn't really argue properly for New Zealanders anymore. And we've got money-making going on at the Post, and we've got someone that supports the National Party as the top dog. We've got Atlas Luke from the NZ Initiative in there working for really just a very small segment and trying to defend the wealth of the super rich in the Post. Here's what the NZ Herald had to say. Editorial: if you don't like this budget, just wait until the superannuation one. And further to this, they believe that we can't have any more universal services, and that's because they don't want to tax the super wealthy in this country. They don't want a capital gains tax or a capital income tax of any kind to bring us into line with the rest of the world. Now, the arguments are always about capital flight, that everyone that's rich will just jump up and leave the country immediately, which we know is a bogus argument. The threat is very low and the estimates are very, very slim. Maybe 2 or 3% of New Zealanders might leave New Zealand, but where will they go? They're not going to fly off like that. That's just a rubbish defence of super wealthy inequity. So in the end, the New Zealand Herald editorial here is actually saying, no, you can't have the things that you could have. The poor must suffer, things must get worse. Superannuation, those who already have superannuation are now going to look down and pull the ladders up and stop people from being able to retire when they're 65. You won't be able to be eligible anymore because we've got to save things because we won't have taxes. We just can't tax the rich. The days of universal state support at the levels we have come to expect are likely to be slowly coming to an end, and we should expect this trend to continue, and we should be preparing for an ongoing debate about what services to keep funding. So if New Zealanders didn't like this year's budget, just wait until they read the budget that means tests and raises the age of superannuation. We can't have a wealth tax, we can't have a capital gains tax, and therefore we can't have universal services. You'll just have to have rotten teeth. You'll have to work 2 or 3 jobs. You will have to suffer while the rich just get richer. So that's basically what our newspapers are telling us. That's where they're embedded at the top of our newspapers. These are commercial newspapers that are in it as free enterprises making a profit, and they're talking up to the people that pay their bills and most of their revenue. So they're not neutral, okay? These people are in there to defend the entire minority of wealthy, and that's what we suffer from in New Zealand from our media. It's not independent. It isn't actually telling you a story that's free from fear or favour. You know, they're absolutely favouring the rich here in these narratives this morning. And finally, you know, if you want any further evidence of that, you do not see any more coverage of Chris Bishop and his drunkenness and what he said at the New Zealand Music Awards the other night. That's just gone. We've already moved on. Luke Malpass, Tracy Watkins, and Thomas Coughlan, and all these people have moved on. They're on the side of the National Party. They're on the side of the ACT Party. They're on the side of Winston Peters. These are the people that will continue to implement austerity, that will punish and punch down on the poor and the working classes, that will rip apart all the things that we could have and continue the decline for New Zealand, making up new measures like Arbugal X to try and make themselves look better. Yeah, these are the media that will do this for us. So I just wanted to kind of comment on all of this today again, but really what I'm just pleased to see is that the fresh-faced and healthy Jacinda Ardern is going to hit the cinemas, and a book's going to be on sale, and we can have a lot better New Zealand. We can have good leadership. It's time to back Labour and the Greens and Te Pāti Māori. It's time to be a whānau. Let's be one big family. Let's get rid of these people. Let's not listen to Ryan Bridge. Let's not listen to Tracy Watkins. Let's not listen to Malpass and Coughlan and these people that are actually working for the black gas. So that's really all I wanted to say today on a Sunday. I think it's time that we all got together and made this country better, and let's get rid of these people and start tuning in more to G News, BHN, Bernard Hickey, Paul the other one, the other guys that are out there working independently, that are doing all the Substacks. Come on everybody, let's do this our way. Let's show them that we can actually have a much better country and do it our way, Aotearoa New Zealand. Have a great day everyone, catch you all again soon.